Hello and welcome to all the participants at this meeting of Baroda Book Browsers. Good morning. And first of all, let me wish all of you, including your near and dear ones and family members, best of the health in times like this, when India is in the grip of second wave of corona pandemic infections. It's all the more imperative now to take care of ourselves and those in the neighborhood, comply with all the directives and guidelines which are issued by the government and health authorities from time to time. This is a crisis of humongous proportion, which all of us have to fight together and overcome together as well. On that note, let me begin with my initial remarks about today's meeting. The book, as you all know, is titled The Ultimate Goal: How Nations Construct Narratives, written by former Chief of Research and Analysis Wing, Vikram Sood, who is also currently one of the think tank members of Policy Research Group on International Studies and Intelligence. Before I give a little bit of brief about the book and the topic, let me also say a few words about the reviewer. I will leave it to him to introduce the author. So I'm dispensing with introducing the author. The reviewer of the book is Vikas Vaze. He's one of the important members of Baroda Book Browsers. And this is the third book which he is reviewing at the forum. Earlier two ones were 0 to 1 and The Elephant Catchers. Vikas is a career professional with cross-sectional experiences in industry, mainly service industry, in telecom, academics, and IT. But for the last couple of years, he has chosen to shift the gears of his professional careers and has taken to social sector servicing. And in that sense, social sector entrepreneur, he has emerged now in last couple of years with full-fledged involvement in social service sector for serving the humanitarian needs, primarily in and around Baroda. He is currently the CEO of Shroff Foundation Trust, which is one of the most reputed public service, not-for-profit making organization. I've had the privilege to be working along with him, I from Rotary side and he from Shroff Foundation Trust, where we are the collaborative partners in Chota Udaipur area, which is a tribal belt near Vadodara, about 120 kilometers. And it's been absolutely a great experience engaging with him in good deal of conversations of mutual interests and concerns. So that's about Vikas. About the book, as the subtitle suggests, How Nations Construct Narratives. In fact, the central theme that passes through this book is that storytelling and therefore the narratives is crucial and essential for the image building and the power fostering by any nation in the world from this basic human capability. Human beings have a very unique capability of able to do a storytelling of the situations, experiences, and happenings around them like no other animal. So he says that drawing from this basic instinct of human beings, narrative should be central and integral part of any nation which wants to have its foreign policy. Intelligence operations, opaque and behind the scenes as they form a very important bedrock in this entire construct of policy relating to the foreign affairs and, in fact, the connectivity of any nation to the world. The nations which are not able to construct proper narratives and are not able to connect the world would always be at a disadvantage. And that is what the author says. While constructing the book's own narrative around this theme, as Vikas would deal with, he has dealt with number of aspects and certain components, what it takes to make the narrative effective. Of course, mainly in Indian context, he has written in this book with anecdotes, his own experiences, and his own understanding and comprehension as a very accomplished and seasoned sleuth, which he was for more than 31 years. So with this remark and without further ado, may I now request Vikas to please come on the platform and carry out your presentation. Over to you, Vikas.
Thank you, Sunil Bhai. And I wish everybody a very good morning. And thanks for joining today's talk. As Sunil Bhai has very appropriately put it, today's talk is about narratives. And I'll start sharing the screen now. Uh, so I hope you'll be able to see that. Sunil Bhai, you'll have to confirm whether it is visible or not. Sunil Bhai, are you able to see the screen?
Yes, now, yeah, it has just emerged. Yeah, thank you. Please go ahead.
Yeah, and I'll put it on the full screen.
Just a small intervention here. Participants, I forgot to mention, but it's now a norm. During the presentation, proceedings, you can please put your questions and your viewpoints in the question and answer box, which will be picked up and taken up for response by the reviewer. So with that note, over to you, Vikas, again.
Thank you, Sunil Bhai. We are roughly at 11:10 and I know I've got 45 minutes. I'll try and finish within time. The book today that we are reviewing together is The Ultimate Code, which is written by former Research and Analysis Wing Chief Vikram Sood on how nations construct at their narratives. As the front page mentions, uh, I wish to, quote the author here. Narratives are not the truth, and they are not instant. They cannot be built in a moment. So it is not a truth, but they nudge you to understand the truth in a particular way. And this happens through sustained nurturing and feeding. Before we continue further, one disclaimer that given today's conditions and the situation that we are in, some of the mentioning, detailing that done by Vikram Sood could be very apt at the moment, and the views are completely that of author as quoted in the book. Vikram Sood himself is a career intelligence officer for 31 years. He retired in March 2003 after heading Research and Analysis Wing, and currently is an advisor at Observer Research Foundation, which is an independent policy think tank based in Delhi. He writes regularly on security, foreign relations, strategic issues, etc. Uh, and has contributed chapters related to security, China, intelligence, India's neighborhood in the last few years. His another book called The Unending Game, a former research and analysis uh, wing chief insights into espionage, was also published in 2018. This book that I am reviewing today was published in the early 2020, so roughly about 15 months to 16 months before today. The book is about the country's ability, any country's ability to construct, sustain, or control the narratives, how intelligence agencies are used as tool of statecraft, who are the other actors involved in narratives. The writer also very clearly mentions that this is a factual account and not a critique. So this book, chapter by chapter, date, time, place, name of persons, is a kind of a chronicle of various events which have happened. And while the book has a huge, kind of coverage, but primarily it focuses on UK, which is a pre-Second World War era, US post Second World War and during the Cold War period, US and USSR, post the Cold War, China and US, and last chapters are dedicated to India and how India stands. On the left panel are the names of various chapters which I'll take you through. Some of the chapters we'll get into details and some of the chapters we'll kind of skip through a little faster. The book starts with the story about assassination of John F. Kennedy way back in 1963. And while Kennedy was shot, it was considered to be end of an era. And after many court cases and after multiple investigations, the conclusion was that there was a gentleman called Lee Oswald, and he individually, in his own manner, had killed Kennedy, who had nothing to do with anything else. So it was an isolated event. Interestingly, 47 other suspects who were also either the convicts or the witnesses also got killed or died in mysterious circumstances during the event. So it kind of shrouds a lot of mystery around it. Incidentally, Robert Kennedy was a great a great proposer of peacekeeping, which he suggested that with Vietnam, the war which was going on, even with Russia, he wanted to build the fences, and thereby it was said that the machinery or the companies, manufacturers who are into arm producing, political or military bigwigs were not in favor of it, and hence he was kind of assassinated. Robert Kennedy, who was his younger brother, he was also a proposer of peace. He also tried to run for president's race, and he was also killed. These two killings which have happened, or these two assassinations which happened in a short period of time, kind of shook the country. In 1969, Nixon was selected or sent to the White House. Vietnam War continued. It also engulfed Laos and Cambodia, and it went on for another 4 years. So, in the book, the author has constantly tried to differentiate between three layers. One is what is the event, which was, for example, here, political assassination of two politicians by isolated people. Narrative, lone killers acting on their own. But the truth, which the author says, was that peace was not profitable to some. And hence, military and wars were required, and that is why the eliminations happened. The author also quotes that those who determine what the truth are the ones who often lay down the narrative. So narrative is a twisted situation. The book starts with introduction. It starts with 1945, how Cold War initiated, how US bombed Hiroshima, and after Hiroshima bombing, suddenly the favors were in tilt of US, and USSR was feeling left behind, and how USSR then overtook and also did their own nuclear blasts, or atomic blasts rather, in 1945 in Kazakhstan, and kind of balanced the tilt. So 1945 Hiroshima, 1945-49 Kazakhstan, and US and America were once again pitted against each other. However, US also used, unlike USSR, which was more on the military side, US also used media giants. Top six media houses of world came from US, who had more than 90% of the readership. So they were able to lay down the narratives, and those narratives were taken up by the people or the readers gradually, and they started filling into it. So after the Cold War was over, the author takes us into racial superiority post Cold War, how white and US and Western countries were kept at the top of the hill. It then also talks in detail about how US, which is supposedly the peacekeeper for the world, is also highest exporter of military equipments, and either have proteges in terms of dictators or supports or changes the regimes. Then the author takes us through George Bush, Obama, Iran, Kuwait, Afghan conflicts. Finally, taking it to global war on terror, which was launched after 7/11, the impact of internet, and very recently, as we are talking and sitting now, the uprise of China, the impact of coronavirus, and how narratives are changing. The author says, big or small, powerful or not, every country must be able to tell its story if it seeks to either dominate or to prevent itself from getting dominated. Uh, Today's narratives are, as we've discussed at the beginning, narratives are not truths. These are agenda-based narratives. And as author mentioned somewhere, that it is almost like giving solidity to pure wind. Narratives are meant to secure economic, military, technology, resources, market, and food security superiority. So the countries who are telling narratives are wanting to acquire these traits. The superpowers, whoever are they, today it could be China and US, earlier it could have been USSR and US, and so on and so forth, always need permanent narratives, long-term narratives, and they need narratives which are global, so that they have a audience, or they have followership through the world, and positive narratives. Usage of media, press, art, culture, drama, all of it's part of it. Narratives are very complicated in creation, particularly in the current situation. So they have a tendency of conviction, they mislead, there are truths which are twisted, there are only one facet of the situation which is shown, another situation is not shown, or it is pro or anti event or person or technology. That is how they are built. Uh, Narratives today are almost like an advertising. They talk about superiority of ideas of a country which is telling the narrative. So whether it is a country like US or USSR or India or China, how they are superior in terms of ideas, how they are superior in terms of cultures, how they are superior in terms of goals. The narratives could be state dominated, like it happens in most of the erstwhile communist countries, or they could be dominated by private sector or corporate, which could be more of a Western flavor. By and large, there is always a challenge in narrative, because narratives are being told by the powerful and are often not accepted or revolted by the disempowered. The disempowered will always seek change. They would seek change in status quo. They are powerful because they hold power and they hold resources. They would want the status to continue. in today's world, with internet being there and with media blasting all around, the narratives need to be even more louder, immediate, repetitive so that they are believed, multi-mode, physical, digital, phygital, and all pervasive. Uh, the author also talks about the relationship between media and intelligence. It talks about the uh, newspapers, it talks about the published media, it talks about internet media, so it talks about Google, it talks about search engines, it talks about televisions, it talks about Star TV and their relationship with intelligence in creating the narrative. So typically, narratives for successful organizations or countries have been created jointly by media and intelligence relationship, is what author says. And they are constantly engaged with each other. They complicate each other, they manipulate each other, they extract the pounds of flesh from each other. But both of them are two sides of coin. So one of them doesn't exist, doesn't really happen. Uh, Now the author starts focusing a little more about US and how US has been able to dominantly play its cards as the world's sole superpower now. Author says that the Cold War was not won by the military alone. Along with military, the aspirational value that West was able to create, particularly US was able to create in the youth all across the world through their symbols. Those symbols were Star Wars, Hollywood movies, jeans, English speaking, concerts, television, shampoo, and a whole lot of creams. It talks about pharmacy, it talks about scientific things, and also the academic in terms of best of the universities being there in US. So the world would aspire to be US like, the world would aspire to follow US, the world would aspire to behave like the big brother is behaving. And that's how the narrative machinery started working. By the time 21st century came and after this Cold War, US was almost, as the book mentions, US was almost in the thought that 21st century belongs to them because they have superiority in military, economy, technology, telecom, and very strong on their soft narratives. So 2001 onwards, US started displaying more muscular and more unilateral behavior, which kind of said that if what US says you accept is great, if you are not against, if you are against what US feels, then you are kind of an anti-state or you are an anti-peace kind of person. Although US itself continued to attack Venezuela, Hugo Chavez for oil, in as late as 2019, US also attacked Bolivia because there are lithium reserves rather, which are going to be raw material used for electric vehicles across the world. And it said that 90% of lithium across the world is there in Bolivia. So Bolivia was attacked, the regime was changed, and the corporates which are operating now in Bolivia are US owned and they own the mines or they have the lease for the mines. However, 9/11 was a completely different experience for US. Uh, the book also mentions that on the day when 9/11 happened, and immediately after that, David Rumsfeld, who was the person in charge at that point in time, and everyone else didn't know how to react. But very, very quickly, they responded back and they put the entire blame on Osama and Iraq. So instantly, the narrative was created. It said that the author says that Rumsfeld was wanting to look at an opportunity to strike back at Iraq. Saddam Hussein, who was their good friend till 85 and was armed by them to attack Iran, had starting behaving differently, was wanting to trade the oil in their currency, etc. So Iraq was to be punished, and they found this as a great opportunity. Author also mentions that while there were multiple members in the 9/11 attack who came from Saudi Arabia, but somehow US decided to not turn the limelight to Saudi Arabia and continued to kind of beat down Iraq and Osama. The book also talks about the rapid rise of China and as late as Russia's role in Trump elections. In fact, the book also mentions that at one point in time when Trump was elected, there was apparently celebrations in Moscow because the people believed that it is Putin who has won the war or who has won the narrative. However, the narrative continued that global war on terror, which was particularly after 9/11, opened up another huge opportunity to feed the military, industry, corporate, and political machinery to move on and make more profits. Author mentions that while US is considered as God's own country, US has highest military presence across the world with more than 800 bases. It also has highest exports of military and defense equipments. Ironically, yet is considered to be a pro-democracy organization. The author also mentions that US is a very deep state, and by deep state he means that it is not only the political or military, but a whole range of institutions which are commanding over the world are kind of acting at behest or acting under influence of US. These organizations include World Bank, World Economic Forum, International Monetary Fund, International Court of Justice, United Nations, World Health Organization, UNICEF, many other multiple tanks, and a lot of internal organizations, which is what he calls as Trinity of Influence, including Council for Foreign Relations, CFR, Trilateral Commissioner, PC, NATO, etc. US also controls large stakes on banking, which is the entire financial vertical. So banking, insurance, on the logistics side, shipping. And US has also, as the author mentions, has been able to successfully create a setup where there is a revolving door or lateral entry between judiciary, executive, and commerce. So people from business moving into executive positions, people from executive moving into judiciary or vice versa is happening. Author gives example of how the narratives are created by giving example of Cuba, where one of the prominent Cuban leaders' sister was shown as naked on the front page of the local newspapers then, mentioning that this is what the Cuba is going through. Later on, it was clarified that it was by mistake and it was a wrong lady, etc., etc. But by then, the damage was done. All these deep state activities also kind of support or help US corporations get entry into overseas economies, small or big. The author then talks about 1973 oil crisis, profits made by OPEC and by Chevron, Exxon, Shell, and BP, and these profits which were made flew back to US in form of dollars getting deposited in US banks. So while the oil fields were in Arab, the corporations were US, and while Arabs were selling the oil, no doubt, but the money was flowing back and getting secured in US banks. Today, as the author mentions, about two-thirds of top US 50 billion corporations come from North America. So that's where the power center today is. Very interestingly, then author takes us to something completely different. And before I start reading it here, uh, the author also mentions that when talk about Hollywood has created a machinery which has made world to feel that America is the protector, be it US spy, be it USSR spies, what were shown in James Bond movies, or Rocky 1, 2, and 3, which is in Afghanistan, where Sylvester Stallone flexed his muscles, or extraterrestrial objects like Jurassic Park, Avatar, or Independence Day. So any problem coming on humanity, any difficulty coming on Earth, it is American power, military power, technology power, IT power, which kind of overtakes them. So the Hollywood has become a huge narrative creation setup for US, and they are rampantly and eagerly subtitled, dubbed online and on theater for global audience, which shows US military technology and economic superiority. Also continues to display US as a democratic, equality, freedom, and benign power. The one which is wanting to restore world as a power which will bring a sense of semblance. Of CIA, FBI, as I mentioned, in this book, as it is said, that are actively involved in creating the content for these narratives. Then it talks about Osama, and something very interesting, probably a lot of people would want to kind of understand. The original plan was that Osama of course was identified at Abbottabad, and some military general from Pakistan had given the location. Subsequently, the plan was that he would be shown as killed in a no-man territory in deep Afghanistan somewhere through a US drone. So US comes out as a winner, and Pakistan comes out as a winner because they have shared the detail and cooperated. And Afghanistan also doesn't lose because it's in a no-man territory. However, the helicopter, which was the stealth helicopter chopper, which was meant to carry out this activity in Abbottabad, crashed. And when the chopper crashed, the US had no option to shift the location, and they had to declare the location. But when they declared the location, they took the full credit on its own. And as a result, Pakistan army and Pakistan establishment was left high and dry, even from their Islamic Brotherhood, that they permitted US to come deep inside their soil and conduct these events without any, kind of control of them. So Hollywood continues to show US as a great power, and are, as I mentioned at the book below, they are asked to propagate American values of freedom, or they are rather propagating American values of freedom, free speech, heroism, magnanimity of government, protector of world, etc., etc. The book then talks about profits of war in name of peace, and here it talks about the fact that after the world Cold War was ended, and there was no need of much military deployment, there were huge issues with arm producing companies because they suddenly ran out of business. So they needed a new model for control and profits. Unless there is consumption, replacement, there would not be any further demand. So there was a great need for periodic wars or periodic exercises. Ultimately, peace was undesired. It is during this time that 9/11 happened. Afghanistan was demolished. Iraq was brutalized with focus on oil, and most of the civil contracts, multi-billion civil contracts, went back to US organizations. So US was able to make profit before the war, during the war, and after the war. And then the book talks about war ecosystem, which has lobbyists, advertisers, think tanks, manufacturers, traders, etc., etc. Very interestingly, then it brings us to China. So how does China really look like now? China has kind of perfected the art, as book says, to influence people to do what is best for country. And the narrative was that it is a benign power, it is rising peacefully, it is not harming anybody else, etc. US and China, as the book mentions, has a very complex grid lubricated by politicians and businessmen. Actually, the book mentions how Donald Trump visited Shanghai, Beijing, along with his wife, daughter, and how they were kind of state guests much before he became the president, and whatever kind of contracts which were undertook then. However, 1961 onwards, China started developing think tanks. They started focusing on Pakistan as an ally. They started building their soft power. So China started kind of building US or like the Hulk was a movie which was built by China. Olympics were hosted, and it was shown as if it's a peaceful rise. However, the narrative continued to be good. The state machinery which was talking about it could not really capture the same spirit or flavor as English or Hollywood or Google or Coke or Levi's produced. So China didn't have a Hollywood of its own. China couldn't produce anything like Google which could go to the world or Coke or Levi's. Then China started to also try their hand on economy by lowering yuan and disrupted US economy. The Border and Road Initiative was brought in. Huawei became a very, very major telecom player across the world. However, all this also kind of didn't really work out. In between, Trump got elected, and when America first was mentioned, it also meant that the other countries could not depend on America for their imports, so they had to depend on China, and then China became stronger. China went on purchasing territory in a predatory manner in Africa, Korea, Afghan, and within our neighborhood, Sri Lanka, Gwadar, Nepal, Bhutan, and so on and so forth. As on today, book says that Xi is the most powerful individual in the world because Communist Party, uh, their supreme is the supremo. The people are at last. However, COVID has changed the narratives. COVID has put China as an irresponsible power. Wuhan was very widely publicized. WHO haps or mishaps were publicized, and as a result, US has been successfully able to create a climate in world that China is not dependable, investment is flying out of China. So at one time, 2 years back when people or 3 years back when people were feeling that China is gradually reaching to a place where it will kind of counterbalance US, China has been thrown off the pedal, at least for now, and US superiority once again kind of reigns supreme. These are two chapters which we will deal a little more with uh, on corporate dreams. How privatization of profits, privatization of army, privatization of other resources started in US. So when Bush declared war on terror, it was not only military. He took the defense teams with them, intelligence team with them, economic, civil right, military, all of them. Since then, America is, as the book mentions, for America, selling the war on far lands has been very, very profitable. So while they prefer not to have bloodbath within their territory, but far away from their borders, if there is war happening, the book says that it is America kind of looks at it as a profitable venture because there are American contracts. And corporates are government's ally in all of that. So it is no more only government, it is government plus corporates. It also talks about privatization and the fact that the real goal is profit maximization with speed, suddenness, and scale. Actually, to the extent that it says that America has been able to privatize the work in such a manner that when they have the war and they took the author quotes the Balkan War as an experiment, where only the ammunition and the soldiers were sent by US, everything else was privatized. So entire logistics, as he said, logistics cover everything from creating the bases, vehicles, telecom equipments, machinery, blah, 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 all of it was there. And at that point in time, when Bush declared the war on terror, there were three people in power, the book mentions. Dick Cheney, who wanted to continue waging the war and thereby make profits for America. Donald Rumsfeld, who identified that disease and epidemics is the next opportunity to make money. And actually, some of us may have heard this word Tamiflu. Tamiflu is a very potent drug which is getting used currently, which was prepared and uh, what should I say? The rights for that, the IP for that was taken by Donald Rumsfeld and his wife's organization. Way back in 2006, US brought in Defense Authorization Act. I'm just laying the here I'm laying the foundation to what we will discuss in the next slide, which is about how pharma has been brought in as a potent support to military now. So from 2006, Defense Authorization Act was brought in, which permits the President of US to deploy armed forces to government and pharma protection, which means laboratories, in our world today, oxygen tanks, hospitals, doctors, production facilities, all of them can be guarded using state machinery. So pharma can continue, kind of producing without worry. Around the same time, FDA, which is US Food and Drug Authority, also started relying and publishing results which were funded by donors or funded by the industry. So obviously there was the neutrality was gone. The industry themselves were proving themselves and publishing their results, and which were authorized and accepted by government. As a result, the book says that doctor, from being a supporter to the family, was highly commercialized and started prescribing drugs which will make money for them, and the whole wheel started spinning. So big money led to big pharma, big oil, and big profits. He also says that Google and private military establishments, PMCs, private military armies, are the new mercenaries. Previously, you used to search Google as a search engine, but author says now Google searches you. Wherever you go, whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you transact, whatever you think, whatever you search, Google knows. Then author also talks about same activity in agri industry where Monsanto, DuPont, etc. brought in the genetic seeds. And while the narrative for pharma or agri is innovation, R&D, good for mankind, removing the hunger, making the world a better place to live, the bottom line is all these, as author mentions, are real. The real goal for all of this is very high profits through planned obsolescence of traditional activities. So traditional medicine, traditional food, traditional crops, traditional arms, including new arms like 2.0 version and 3.0 version and 4.0 version, like your mobile phones or televisions. The old one will keep getting obsolete, the new one will continue coming. And these, particularly on the agri side, he mentions that the seeds now which are being brought in are water uh, dependent, not water dependent, rather they are water absorbing seeds. So every country which is going to these crops will need very high level of water, which would mean that very soon the water tables would run dry and very soon they will be dependent on US once again for their food security. So that's one way of bending the, the ones who would like to stand straight. The corporate dreams further continues, and this slide may evoke some thoughts. Way back in 1974, when Nixon was brought in, that time Bush used to work for a corporation, and a Kissinger report was published, which said that if the population of the world is not controlled, then West and its resources will be at stake. So billions of dollars were spent, some $137 billion is what book says, were spent across the world to incentivize people to either go for population control in the name of family planning or in name of child and mother care. The prediction was that COVID will be centric in Africa. This prediction was made by US uh, media, and it was expected that it will be centric in Africa. It will have 3 lakh deaths and will at least push 30 million people to poverty. Way back in 2014, Barack Obama, and in 2015, Bill Gates, in their TED talk, mentioned about an infectious epidemic which is likely to come, and how the countries or how the US should be ready to handle that. In 2018, Gates Foundation, who is the financing partner to an organization, multinational pharma company called Gilead, developed Remdesivir. And Remdesivir was given to Cipla and some other Indian companies to be produced uh, free of what they call is the license fees or royalty till the new drug for COVID is identified. I would like to just mention, repeat this. In 2018, this was developed and given till the new drug for COVID would be developed. So COVID was anticipated. This is what the one gets an impression by reading the book. In January 2019, US brought in CARES bill, which is Coronavirus Act Relief and Economic Security Bill. It was introduced in US Parliament and was cleared in the month of March, which gave $27 billion to pharma companies to develop vaccines for the pandemic which will come in future. In October 2019 in New York, there was a simulation activity conducted by Gates Foundation where these participants were not from third world or India, but mostly from Western countries on how the response mechanism will be when the pandemic breaks out. The author says US was looking for full spectrum dominance as and when the pandemic breaks out, from drugs to media to narrative to China to material, everything. As it stands now, the world is in grip of corona, and economic recovery will only happen of the countries where the people are vaccinated. So vaccination is linked to economic recovery, which is likely to evoke economic nationalism and build a new set of narratives. Post-COVID, also the arms manufacturers and tourism countries will need new narratives because tourism won't work and arms probably won't be required. So the author says the new nexus is military, industry, technology, intelligence, and pharma complex. So pharma, which was out of it, has become a major stakeholder into it right now. Then author brings it to India and how India kind of moved on, how North was plundered uh, by invaders, how South continued to flourish and their kings expanding their empire through sea route. However, India missed the Industrial Revolution. But after Britishers came, India continued to be portrayed as a snake charmer, poor, Taj Mahal, beggar land. Lord Macaulay, when he brought in the new education policy, which was West education policy, continued to harp on the superiority of military, technology, economy, culture, and intellect of West, thereby downgrading the traditional wisdom and traditional knowledge of East, or India in particular. So the perception and narratives created at colleges for youngsters and the ones who would rule the country in future as officers or as businessmen, they did not have any reference to ancient India and its capabilities. Britishers also used radical Islam to divide and rule the country, particularly after the Cold War and after the independence, with India leaning towards the left and India anti-imperialist, as in India anti-British at that point in time. The West needed a hold on subcontinent, so the Pakistan was a natural choice for them. So Saudi and Pakistan were created as an asset by British for benefit in Commonwealth and in Muslim world. And of course, the oil economy was there, and Pakistan continues to give them a great launch pad at a central location across Southeast Asia or West Asia. Then author also takes us to Winston Churchill's views, which are very, very contrary, who is not very happy with the way India is ruled and would like to do it differently. The author says that the game of creating new narratives of India has only begun just now, and he is referring to last 5 to 10 years of time. He says India is a new country, very old civilization, but a new country, 60, 70-year-old country, and has a continuum. It is amalgamation of influences. But India and Indians need to understand that their history is not 200 years of history, but more than 1,000 years of history. So what has happened in 300 years is not what the real India is. Real India is something much beneath the layers. The author says that we will all need to confront the past with open eyes and respect ourselves and respect our heroes to feel confident. Today's Indians, new Indians, young Indians expect self-respect along with opportunity. So whichever country they are going to work for, while they are respected and the opportunity is there, but they won't want to work at a place where they are treated as a second citizen. Ultimately, it says that a nation as large as 130 crores or 130 billion people must have its own narrative. We cannot run on the narratives which are written by West. After all, the author says, in spite of one of the largest democracies and new democracies, elections are fair, transfer of power happens smoothly between one government to another incumbent, law and order machinery is gradually improving, but there is much to do. There are still one-sided media stories on minorities, which he says portray a wrong picture of country in Western media, which Western media picks up and comes back to haunt us. It also talks about Hindu nationalism and rise of Modi as a new dominant narrative. It says that while US and a lot of Western countries do not have any problem in calling them a Christian country, or a lot of countries calling them as Islamic countries or Buddhist countries, he says, why should the Hindu nationalism not be seen that way? That it is a natural thing because it is the largest. Also, rise of Modi, they mention, is the first time that a completely new thought process has been brought up on the national level. Author finally, in one of the last two slides, so this last and after that is one more slide, talks about why India needs a narrative now. Because earlier pro-Soviet flavor, US coating with Pak is gone. World was bipolar, which is US, USSR. Then it went to Cold War. Then it became only American, unipolar. Then it got to Asian age, which Asia, Chindia we used to call it, China and India. And now the power is tilting between China and India. America first, Brexit and racial superiority have hampered UK and some part of America very effectively. But the new initiatives taken by the current government, it says, which is direct benefit transfers or GST, faceless IT scans, net banking, Mudra, the solvency code, faceless IT, technology, etc., reducing friction points. And these are all new things which are happening, which have never happened in the country before for the large masses. Having a career diplomat as a foreign minister, lateral entry into IAS cadre, new foreign policy to look east, SARC, etc., etc. But he says that unless the narrative is multifaceted, modern, and engages with corporates successfully by doing ease of business and mixture of ancient and modern, this narrative will not be successful. Finally, the crux. The crux, as he was mentioning, as the book has mentioned rather, supremacy in Pacific is going to be the most critical thing in next 25 to 30 years because that is where the powers are going to lie. So whether it is China, whether it is Australia, whether it is Quad, whether it is India, whether it is US, it is Pacific which is going to hold the key. Then it says the real power is not from the gun. Hence the arms manufacturers are not the real power today, but are the ones who control the narratives. He talks about agility, ability to anticipate and respond to social media as a very, very critical tool to manage the narratives. Facts, political or historical, he says, are malleable to geopolitical convenience and can be suitably changed depending on the country which is telling its narrative. Building narrative and sustaining narrative is to control the storyline. And as the title of the book is, the ultimate goal for ambitious and powerful is to control the world and to keep the controls in their hand. As he says, today 3% of the uh, people across the world control 97% of the wealth. He also mentions that Western media is in all probability likely to continue narratives for a foreseeable future because of its global reach, deep pockets, trained talent, and technology. Finally, he says, the Indian narrative has been run far too long from elsewhere. For a country of our size and for the traditional wisdom that we hold, it needs to change. And it cannot be determined in Europe, US, or elsewhere. India and Indians must tell their own story. However, Western narrative will continue to remain, especially that portray West suppose invincibility and superiority. But a narrative that represents 1.3 billion people must exist and must be known. An alternate Indian story must, must be heard by the world. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sunil.
Thank you, Vikas, for a great comprehensive exposition of all the important aspects which the author has dealt with in his book, especially the subtext and the sub themes arising from the role of narratives and the role of storytelling. And in turn, I personally feel narratives and storytelling is nothing but this soft part, which I think in your presentation you have very well covered. So thank you for this wonderful effort. And let me share one observation, Vikas, before I take to the questions in the question answer box. Uh, if I look at the recent history since 18th and 19th century, if you see the colonial powers of Europe and Britain, uh, they had the military power or the navy power of that point of time, which was most crucial, plus the commercial interest serving capacity of their corporations as well as the government, which helped them to dominate the world. After Second World War, and due to the increased globalization and communication proliferation, there is a third dimension which was added over and above the military, technology, and sound economy, plus the commercial interests of the corporates. And that third dimension was the soft power of narratives, and addressing to the aspirations of the youths and people of the world as to as a showcase. I think this forms the triad of what in modern times or in the times to come the dominance of whichever country or a block of countries will ensue. On Indian aspect, which he has covered in his book, and say that you have to take control of your own narratives and all these things. I personally feel that yes, taking control of your narratives is must, but in order to put it in a transcendent form across the world, first you have to build your own military and economic muscles, which China has now been able to do that, but yes, it has not been able to develop the soft power like the US. So it will take some time for China also to do that. In the next 20, 30, 40 years, I personally feel that the triad of these three aspects will be important for any country to dominate. What's your view on this? And then I'll take to the question answer from the box here. Vikas,
Uh,
please.
yeah, I kind of fully agree with you, Sunil bhai. In
Hmm.
fact, one of the point which they mention says that in order to build our new narratives, there is no option but to have soft and military power with our side. Unless a country is in a position to dominate, at least dominate in the sense not get dominated, it will not be able to tell the narratives. Uh, I'll just take 30 seconds more. It also talks about a lot of other countries who tried to do the same in past and who were effectively either sidelined or kind of washed out. And the book speaks about how the establishment dumped people or sacrifice like Shah of Iran or Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein or Bashar al-Assad, or how Suharto continues to be there on their side. So unless we have our own power first, we cannot exert the power. So whether that power is military power or soft power, we are strong on knowledge power, but I believe yes, these two would be very important for us.
Yeah, this one is a first full question or observation. In fact, it's a question from Maulik Mehta. He says, has the author touched upon the so-called intellectuals of the developing countries who have been subsumed by the Western powers to propagate the inherent superiority of the Western world? How much have the intellectuals of the developing countries been consumed or subsumed by the overarching influence of the Western world to, in a way, subserve their interests, or to toe their line? I think that's the sum and substance of this question. Has the author dealt with this particular question in the book?
Yes, Sunil bhai. Author has extensively dealt with it, and there
Mhm,
is a full chapter which talks about the media, intelligence, and their kind of close linkages. It also
mhm,
talks about the 6 media corporations and barons which control the narrative in the US,
mhm,
and also mentions how think tanks have been developed all across, how US has built their think tanks all across, including
mhm,
India, and how they continue to identify academicians, rich or businessmen who would kind of come to their fold. The author also speaks about how China has also started this policy since last about 7 years,
mhm,
where every year 100 journalists from developing countries, including India, are given a full 1 year full scholarship, so-called activity at China, which is internship kind of a thing, and full paid. And they say that all newspapers, including Times of India and Indian Express, are part of that, and similar activities continue happening in the West also. So that's where he mentioned that intelligence and media have a very complicated relationship, and they continue to manipulate and take advantage of each other.
In fact, just to add to that, China has developed so many China-centric centers in universities across USA. That's also probably an effort to disseminate the greatness of China, or how China has arrived, and sort of soft power, something like that.
True,
That I
true.
think every country, whenever it gets an opportunity, does, especially with the economic might and technology capability developing. There is one more question come observation of Ashok Patel. Of course, he says that it has already been dealt with by the reviewer, but what he says is that only the great power or the superior authorities can control the narrative. And he gives the example of how the Akbar Great narrative also continued in India for many, many centuries. I think that's what his observation is. I think it's a pretty pertinent observation. What's your take, Vikas, on this?
Uh, Author says that weak don't have voices. So when you have strength, whether it is economic strength, intellectual strength, military strength, you tend to have a voice. And when you combine all of them together with soft power, then you can create an effective narrative across the globe. So yes, Ashok bhai, you are absolutely right. Unless there is a country which is strong, they will not be able to create the narratives. And I'm just kind of surfing through the paper. If you see the bottom line, it says those who determine what the truth are the ones who often lay down the narrative.
Yeah. In fact, just to quote an axiom, which is very frequently used, uh, lies, damn lies, and statistics. So, in the arena of, influencing the international affairs, it could be, probably, something like that. The one or the countries which are able to take care of their individual enlightened interests the best way through, the fusion or symbiotic forces of, the military or technology prowess, successful commercial enterprises to offer, to the rest of the world, and then finally the very powerful software narratives. I would add one thing to this, and probably in next 5 to 10, 15 years, it will become very more clear. I think the use of artificial intelligence and digitization will also have a very major role to play to add to that third dimension of increasing the influence and the dissemination, and in turn probably affect the minds of the people at large, including hacking of the minds through the more and very potent use of technology. That's what I personally feel. That your final word, Vikas, and then we will probably conclude this meeting with a note of thanks to everyone who have taken time off on this Sunday and attend this meeting and participate. Vikas, would you like to say something on this final note?
Yes. Uh, Besides a great thank you to everybody, I think we should be very, very well prepared as a country. That it appears that China, US, India, and parallel forces which were emerging, coronavirus has very squarely and clearly put the crown back on the head of West. Uh, China, which is the most dominant force after US today, probably is being seen with a lot of skepticism. And for our country also, as we go forward, probably the times will come where we'll be forced to take a stance of this side or that side, and where we take the stance will probably determine what our narrative will be and how we will come out of coronavirus and come out of related such issues in the future. Thank you,
Yeah,
Sunil, and
there
thanks
is one
everyone.
last question from Jai Kumar in Chennai. Is most of the history is nothing but a narrative by the powerful and influential. Facts are, possible hidden gems, uh, unearthed, and shared within few who do not or who cannot change those narratives. Then what is this? Time tune is the best thing. Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
So I'm sorry, but I didn't get the question. So what is the real question?
Yeah. So that's an observation come question. So
Observation is
time.
pertinent. Yes,
Exactly.
history is what people have wanted to tell, and so something which hasn't been told hasn't become a part of history. So Jay, you're right there. But as a question, I think the book does not deal with it, so I'll not be qualified to answer that part.
Right. Thank you on that note, Vikas, in particular, for your wonderful exposition of the book review with very vivid presentations, and also your very thoughtful, comprehensive views. Also to the participants for participating. And of course, I would like to thank Naman Associates, Samir Parikh and Sambhavi for your continuing ongoing support in every possible way to be able to host this web-enabled meetings of Baroda Book Browsers. So until we meet next month will be Baroda Book Browser book review will be a break or interlude, but we'll come with the sideway program of In Conversation. So wait for the announcement, wait for the email notification. Until then, take care, stay safe, stay brave, and all the best for remainder of the Sunday. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, bye.